Right, are aliens really fallen angels? I want to take you back to the book that was first, one of the books that is considered the first book about UFOs. It was back in 1919. It's called The Book of the Damned by Charles Fort. And by many it's considered the first book that was written the same way that many books relating to the UFO phenomenon are written later on. And it's quite interesting that he also recorded different anomalous phenomena in the sky, but of course it was written in the language of his time. Now, since the famous crash in Roswell in 1947, almost 70 years ago, we have been bombarded from thousands of books related on this subject. But you will find in most cases, most of the people writing these books, they either started as researchers and then they wrote the book, or you will find many times there is some sort of wanting to become famous or gain publicity behind the reasons why they're writing it. But there is one specific writer who stands out from most of the rest, and this is Jacques Vallée, a man who started off as a scientist and not as a researcher, and later on got involved with the UFO phenomenon. Now, you've probably seen this film, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and in that film, the Steven Spielberg's film, there is a French scientist who's going around the country recording this phenomenon. And actually Steven Spielberg was inspired from this scientist, Jacques Vallée, who is a very credible scientist himself. He has a PhD in computer science and he holds a master's degree in astrophysics. And he has been involved with many very interesting projects, such as the mapping of Mars with NASA, and he was part of the ones who helped develop the internet in its early stages. So he's not just anyone, he's also the only person to having addressed the United Nations on the subject of UFOs. Now, you will find that Vallée, in his first book, Anatomy of a Phenomenon, in 1965, he argued that, like most of the ufologists, that what we witness is a complex intelligent life coming from somewhere away from the Earth. So he is one of those who believed at the very beginning that the phenomenon was pretty much physical. But by 1969, with his book Passport to Magonia, now Vallée's assessment of the UFO phenomenon has undergone a massive shift. And that's much to the consternation of others who saw him as a proponent of the UFO phenomenon and its analysis. And he's now, for the first time after these years, he's proposing the idea that actually the UFO phenomenon is not physical, but it's pretty much paranormal, and what we are considering, what we are witnessing, is the manifestation of a phenomenon which assumes different kind of contexts and different kind of shapes throughout the ages. Now, a few years later, he comes up with another book, The Invisible College, in 1975. And Vallée posted the idea of a control system this time. So what he said, UFOs and related phenomenon are the means through which man's concepts are being rearranged. And Vallée said that what I'm proposing is I'm not trying to redefine the idea of God, and I'm not saying that there are some psychic entities that they have locked us in this prison of reality where they can monitor us, but what I'm saying is that the UFOs are trying to address humans on the level of mythology and imagination. And what I do mean is that mythology rules at a level of our social reality over which normal political and intellectual action has no power. So we keep receiving constantly absurd messages. We don't know what the origin might be, but we do know that they're absurd messages, that they're addressing human beings on that level. And in this way, they create a mythology about the whole phenomenon. Now, the interesting thing is that up to this, most of the 20th century, the UFO phenomenon was seen as something that was not to be dealt with within the scientific community. Most of the scientists saw it as something that if you tried to touch the subject, you would be laughed at because there's no real scientific evidence behind it. Up to a certain point within the 20th century, most of the scientists were firm believers in the theory of evolution. So therefore, they actually believed that everything we know about life started here on this planet. So therefore, any involvement from UFOs was unnecessary or unwanted. But this whole thing changed, and because of this man. In 1952, biologist Francis Crick, along with James Watson, discovered the structure of the DNA, which of course earned him a Nobel Prize. Now, the complexity of the structure of this infinitely small block of life, it was such that famously Francis Crick said that any biologist that is looking to analyze the structure of the DNA, he has to constantly remind himself that what he's seeing was not designed but was evolved. Because up to this point in history, the argument of how life came about here on Earth was an argument between those who believe in God and those who believe that life was nothing more than the result of evolution. Now, Crick, on the other hand, he was a very devout atheist and a firm believer in evolution. On the other hand, he was very honest, and he couldn't possibly say that this DNA was evolved but has been designed, so he had to come up with something completely new. And what he came up was that theory of panspermia, directed panspermia. Basically, the theory of panspermia is that life was seeded here on Earth accidentally, maybe by the cosmos or the comets or something else. But he proposed directed panspermia, which basically advocates the idea that aliens or some sort of intelligence from out of space seeded life here on Earth, and they had a purpose behind it. Now, although this idea was proposed from Francis Crick, and it was, at the beginning, it was his idea on the whole subject, slowly but surely that gained momentum within the scientific community. And now, after all these years, there are so many atheists who believe that. And we have also very famous scientists such as Stephen Dawkins, writer of the bestseller book, The God Delusion, who also endorsed the idea recently. We have also films which promote this idea ad nauseum, such as Prometheus, which was one of the latest films. Now, here's a clip from Stephen Dawkins, who admits that it's a very credible idea to believe in such a thing, the directed panspermia. And I just would like to play you the clip.
In the book.
Well, then who did create the heavens and the earth?
Why do you use the word who? You see, you immediately beg the question by using the word who.
Well, then how did it get created?
Well, by a very slow process.
Well, how did it start?
Nobody knows how it started. We know the kind of event that it must have been. We know the sort of event that must have happened for the origin of life.
And what was that?
It was the origin of the first self-replicating molecule.
Right, and how did that happen?
I told you we don't know.
So you have no idea how it started?
No, nor has anybody.
Nor has anyone else. What do you think is the possibility that intelligent design might turn out to be the answer to some issues in genetics or in evolution?
It could come about in the following way. It could be that at some earlier time, somewhere in the universe, a civilization evolved by probably some kind of Darwinian means to a very, very high level of technology and designed a form of life that they seeded onto perhaps this planet. Now, that is a possibility and an intriguing possibility. And I suppose it's possible that you might find evidence for that if you look at the details of biochemistry, molecular biology. You might find a signature of some sort of designer.
Wait a second. Richard Dawkins thought intelligent design might be a legitimate pursuit?
And that designer could well be a higher intelligence from elsewhere in the universe. Well, but that higher intelligence would itself have had to have come about by some explicable or ultimately explicable process. It couldn't have just jumped into existence spontaneously. That's the point.
So Professor Dawkins was not against intelligent design, just certain types of designers, such as God.
So what I want you to glean from this video clip is that now the idea of directed panspermia has gone mainstream, and many scientists, including famous Richard Dawkins, endorsed this idea. Now, also at the same time, the film industry, with films in the past, such as the Invasion of the Body Snatchers and Star Trek The Wrath of Khan, but more recently with Prometheus from 2012, and I will play you a clip, they advocate the idea that the aliens seeded life here on Earth. In actual fact, when you watch this clip, you witness some sort of ritual that the aliens are being part of, so they can seed life here on Earth. And here's that clip. So what I want you to glean from this video clip is that basically the same idea that the scientific community is trying to push to us, it's also the film industry is trying to do the same by advocating the connection then between aliens and life, how it began here on Earth, because simply they can't explain the complexity even of the smallest structure, such as the block of DNA. So I want you to come back with me again, back to Jacques Vallée, because as I just said earlier, he proposed the idea of this enclosed control system, that he thought it was a paranormal phenomenon and it was an enclosed control system. And basically he's saying that there are three stages to this control system. The first one is the physical object. So what that means is that is probably a flying saucer, or it is a projection, or it might be something else entirely. But what we know conclusively from the first stage, that there is a tremendous quantity of electromagnetic energy, in a small volume based upon the evidence gathered from the traces. So there is data from that, but there is also the evidence from electromagnetic and radar detection and the anxiety of electromagnetic field which the victims have suffered on that scene, which is the famous EMF. Now, the second part of this control system is that the perceiving part, what the actual conductees perceive, the phenomenon. What they tell us is that they see a flying saucer. Now, they may have seen an actual object, or they may have hallucinated under the influence of microwave radiation or any other number of things. The fact is that the witnesses were exposed to an alteration and of perception which caused them to describe an object or objects that they actually witnessed. So that's the second part, the perceiving part. And of course we have the third part, the third component. So that was the second part, the perceiving part. And then we have the third component where the actual story becomes part of the social phenomenon. So when they retell the story, that enters the social arena and of course is being given as a story to everyone around them and around the world now with all the social media. Now, at this point, it doesn't matter whether the encounter was real. If many people believe it to be real, then it is real. And this is the point where our perceptions, as Jacques Vallée said, are being rearranged. Now, the UFO phenomenon maybe is comparable to the strategic deception operations of the British during the Second World War to fool the Germans. Basically what they did, they created artificial tank tracks in the desert and in other ways simulated the passage of large armored divisions. They even caused dust storms to perpetuate the illusion, which the Germans found very convincing indeed. And let me give you an example of what I mean. When you apply these deceptive tactics to the way UFOs operate, then you come to some very interesting conclusions. In Northern California, for example, two older persons saw a UFO take off. And afterwards, they saw a sort of ring on the ground. Now, they did call the authorities, they came, they collected data, they collected even samples from this ring to find out what it was. Obviously, what we see here is undeniable physical evidence left behind from UFOs. So there were the molten metal, which turned out to be brass in the laboratory, and sand. Now, interestingly, this sand, when it was examined by the geologist, he said the sand was highly unusual, didn't contain any quartz, and it wasn't even sand, stream sand or beach sand or residue of or mining of anything. It looked like it was like grinding two different kinds of materials together and producing this kind of sand. So what I'm saying then is what was left behind, it wasn't what you would expect to get from a UFO. So could that possibly be that there is some deception involved with this phenomenon, a way to try to get you to see evidence for something that it wasn't actually there? Now, I'm going to get now to the point where we see different parts of the story which they don't seem to add up with the UFOs, and they seem to suggest that there is some deception involved. The first one is this, that the aliens changed their point of origin with the passing of time. What do I mean by that? Is that before man had been to outer space or sent satellites there, the aliens, whenever they contacted somebody, they would say they were from Venus or from Jupiter. But as time went by and man learned more about our planets, we realized that no one could live on a planet like Jupiter or Venus. So it sounds like now aliens have changed the story. So whenever we get reports, we find out that they are coming from faraway places like Andromeda or Pleiades. Now, in the 1950s, the entities typically told conductees that they were from Mars and Venus, where we have already sent satellites, and we know it's impossible to have people living in these planets. But later on, we see these stories have changed, and this place is now become Andromeda or Pleiades, which is almost 2.5 million light years away. In other words, you can't really check the story. It's impossible. So could that mean that there is some deception involved with the subject? Now, a famous conductee, Adamski, in 1952, is reported to have been contacted from an alien called Orthon. And he had these fine features, and later on these aliens came to be called the Nordic aliens. And this Orthon apparently met with him in the desert center of California, and purportedly some other people saw this these two meeting together. And shortly afterwards, according to Adamski, there was also a ship involved, an alien ship, and this Orthon told him that he was from Venus. And the thing is, this Orthon character told him that he was, Adamski said he was a humanoid. So he was a humanoid from Venus. Now, problem is, when later on we sent a spaceship, unmanned spaceship to Venus and satellites, we find out that it's one of the most unhospitable planets for life on the planet, on the solar system. To give just a small example, Venus has a temperature of 464 Celsius, and the atmospheric pressure on this planet's surface is 90 times that of the Earth. So in other words, as an article described what it is like, what is the life expectancy on this planet. Say if a spaceship landed on the planet Venus, how long would you live if you come out? It's 10 seconds. That's how long. So it describes it this way: I've landed a spaceship on Venus and impatiently stepped out of the airlock on the cracked basalt. What happens to me? In 3 words: splat, sizzle, choke. So instant death. But remember, this Orthon alien told Adamski that he was a humanoid. So we were talking about humanoids. And of course, later on in 1962, we see this transition in the story of where they're coming from. As Barney and Betty Hill now describe these aliens coming from a galaxy from Zeta Reticuli, which is 39 light years away. So we can't really check the story anymore. Now, a second part of this argument is the way that aliens communicate is like demons. And why I'm saying that? Well, you probably all seen that from Star Trek. Considering the technological advancements, you would expect the aliens at least to communicate with a highly evolved device, like the communicator that you see here from the Star Trek series. Instead, the only way they can communicate with you is exactly the same way as we know from Middle-Age stories, by possessing you, taking over you. Why is that? How can that be exactly the same? Now, the other one, which I will go through some photographs, is the way that UFOs mimic human technology. And this is a bit more complicated, and I will explain to you in a bit. You see here 2 different photographs. On the one hand, we have some aerial phenomenon witnessed by Germans in Nuremberg in 1561, which they look like spheres or orbs. And later on, we have the development of the first air balloon from Montgolfier in 1783. So there is some sort of similarities here. Now, here on the left-hand side, you have the first ever aerial photograph of a a reported UFO in 1870, and similar shape of aerial device from humans in 1930, the Zeppelin. Now, again, even in our last century, the 20th century, you start with UFOs look this way in the early 50s, and later on they become something like this later on, which is a bit different. And I will explain why. When the British National Archive released years of UFO documents, most experts were amazed to see this change and how the reported sightings changed shape over time. So you see at the beginning where it says A1, during the early 50s, UFOs would appear in a streamlined circular shape, but as stealth technology developed, UFOs mysteriously began adopting a more angular shape. So it would seem that alien design mimics Earth's modern technology. As I said, again, it's a bit more complicated because in some cases you see the alien technology being there beforehand. Did we copy them? Was it some sort of influence upon us? So it's a bit more complicated. That's not complicated though. UFOs pop in and out of reality instead of following a route that can be traced from outer space. And that's quite interesting, because many researchers would tell you that UFOs do not appear to come from outer space, but appear suddenly, as it was from another dimension. So you won't get a report for somebody on the radar that say, oh yeah, they're just coming around Jupiter, they go through the dark side of the moon. We never get that. And they seem to pop in and pop out of existence, as if they were from a different dimension. And that's very interesting because demons and angels in the Bible, they do exactly the same thing. They pop in and pop out of our dimension. And here is a clip of somebody who's actually recorded that phenomenon, and it shows how they do this transition.
You're about to see what we call the interdimensional shift sequence. It's an amazing sequence because it shows something actually moving from one dimension into another. A UFO that appears to just suddenly come from nowhere, as if from another dimension. But now we have a little bit of an idea of what that actually means. You're going to see the curvature of the Earth down here, and you're going to see a lot of lightning flashes on the ground here. And then you're going to see a brightly glowing object kind of moving very slowly into frame here, and then it kind of just stops around here. And there'll be a lot of what appear to be, again, what NASA will try to tell us are shooting stars or meteorites streaking by, some of them actually leaving the Earth. You're going to see things coming straight in and disappearing into the clouds. It's really a powerful scene. But watch up here. At about this point in the screen, keep your eyes focused there, because all of a sudden, out of the black void of space, above the Earth, a disk with the familiar shape just suddenly, out of nowhere, just appears. How did this happen? The space shuttle's actual cameras, the black and white cameras that we're looking at, can see into the near ultraviolet, a frequency of light that humans can't see because it's too high in energy. We know that if the UFO is actually mass vibrating at a high frequency wave state, all the UFO has to do is go into a higher level of energy, and it can simply suddenly disappear. But in reverse, if the UFO were actually already in a higher frequency than the cameras could detect, somewhere up in the far ultraviolet or the X-ray or gamma ray spectrum, all it has to do is slow its energy down to that equal to the energy levels of the near ultraviolet or the visible light, and suddenly the UFO would appear. I remember in 1968 when I saw the first and only daylight UFO I'd ever seen. For over half an hour I watched with hundreds of people in amazement in Berkeley, California in 1968, looking up into the sky, and we watched this disk, this incredibly visible metallic disk, just hover there, and all of a sudden blinking out and disappearing in a matter of a second. It didn't accelerate and go somewhere else, it actually just disappeared. So essentially the UFO I saw in 1968 did the same thing, but in reverse of what you're seeing here. This UFO is doing the opposite. It's slowing down in energy and suddenly just appears in our dimension, and all of a sudden it just kind of drifts by and you'll see a lot of other exciting things in this part of the video.
So I hope he makes it clear, but it would seem to me that they actually pop in and pop out of reality. Now, another one is this: UFO speeds and movement defies the laws of physics. And that's another very interesting one. Well, you see, you know that Newton's first law of motion, sometimes referred to the law of inertia, where it says an object at rest stays at rest, and an object in motion stays in motion with the same speed and in the same direction. Now, but when you see the UFOs doing some tremendous turns left and right, usually if any humanly manufactured aeroplane or other flying object did that, you will instantly die, whoever drives this flying object. But look, watch this little clip, because I think it explains it even better than I do.
Eyewitness accounts of super-fast accelerations, lightning turns, and sudden stops seem to violate known laws of physics. But could aliens find a way around these laws?
So what we have to keep in mind here is the principle of inertia. That principle, stated first by Isaac Newton, says that an object at rest or in motion tends to stay at rest or in motion unless acted on by an outside force. So to generate these kinds of crazy changes in inertia, you'd really have to act on that object with an immense amount of force.
Following the same logic, a fighter pilot traveling near the speed of sound, attempting to make a 90-degree turn at the same speed, would experience something close to 300 Gs of force. The most that a human pilot wearing a pressure suit can manage without blacking out is around 10 Gs. If his physiology were remotely similar to humans, an extraterrestrial pilot undergoing a 300 G maneuver would instantly perish. His internal organs would continue moving forward and crush against the skeleton.
If they were similar to us, they'd probably have to have a way of injecting fluid, internal fluid, inside their bodies so that they dealt with this problem of their organs floating around inside. And if they were strapped in properly and cushioned properly, end up not having internal damage when they accelerated and decelerated.
To effectively cancel the inertial effects on the craft itself, the pilots might switch on a technology that is beyond the reach of modern humans.
So in order to cancel out the effects of a 300 G turn and not be squished by that amount of force, you'd have to have some sort of technology or a device that was capable of canceling the effects of inertia.
The device would have to manipulate the force of gravity, using a type of force field to counteract the gravitational forces that rule the entire universe.
This device you could turn on if you wanted to, then turn it off if you wanted to, or maybe it would come on and off automatically. This is high technology that's out of sight.
But if science can't yet explain how these craft could overcome the deadly problem of inertia, can it help explain their shapes? Particularly the most famous shape of all, the flying saucer.
So the main idea behind this is that, yes, of course, you can theorize that, yeah, they have very well advanced technology to perform this kind of maneuvers, but from what we know so far from our physics, we know that there is no such a thing, because no physical object can possibly withstand the injuries involved with this kind of maneuvers. The other one is that UFOs change color and shapeshift like spiritual entities, not spacecrafts from outer space. I will play only the small part of this clip because it's quite long, but please watch how the UFO changes like no physical object we know of. So what we see can only be described as a biological interdimensional being rather than a spacecraft. So this is only a small part of the clip, but as you can see, it doesn't look like a spaceship. It looks like some sort of entity struggling to maintain its shape within our dimension. And that's why I think it looks more like this biological interdimensional being rather than a spacecraft or a UFO. Now, so we get to, having considered all these different arguments, which I think there is deception involved with the whole phenomenon, what is the point where we have to ask then, why do aliens visit the Earth? And I want you to go back to a very famous scientist, one that you all know of, Carl Sagan, that he was also the one who was involved with sending this message in space, looking for intelligent life. He said in his book, Intelligent Life in the Universe, what might an advanced extraterrestrial civilization want from us? Well, he said, go back to when the Europeans tried to go to America. One of the prime reasons why they want to explore the New World, it was because they wanted to convert the inhabitants to Christianity peacefully, if possible, forcefully, if necessary. So he said, can we then exclude the possibility of some sort of an extraterrestrial evangelism? Now, Dr. Sagan raises this astute question, and the more researchers and authors out there study the reports of alien abductions and encounters, the more the question comes up then. And the argument is one of the affirmative answer. So keep this question in mind. Are the aliens, these extraterrestrials, intentionally evangelizing people to an alternative spirituality? Or as Jacques Vallée said earlier, are they trying to purposefully change our concepts from the ones that we held before? Now, some of the messages communicated to alien contactees from these aliens carry totalitarian overtones and urge humanity to unite under one world government. For example, some of the messages: democracy is obsolete. Elections should be done away with. Then we have racist ideologies are encouraged, where some have more alien DNA, etc. A new world order is needed, and we will be setting it up with our help. So, also another one, like all conscious races at this stage of progress, evolution, you may feel isolated on your planet. This impression gives you a certain view of your destiny. Yet you are at the brink of big upheavals, end of the world, that only a minority is aware of. So why would they want us to unite into one new world government, one world government, which, as far as we know, it's a bad thing and will destroy democracy and your rights? Well, is this alien UFO agenda connected with this new world order agenda? Well, it would seem to be the case. Now, let's just put aside this alien gospel and concentrate on another gospel, because we have to analyze this term fallen angels. And we get this term from our knowledge from the Bible, the book of Genesis, from the book of Revelation, and also from the book of Enoch and all the apocryphal sources. And I want you to question some things before we analyze this term. What if there are no aliens? What if they're not coming from other planets? What if clearly there is deceit associated with this phenomenon? Now, according to what we know from our science so far, everything that we witness around us is physical. We know about the Earth, the planets, and the universe. But when we have the Bible describing what is out there, it doesn't describe it as a universe, it describes it as three heavens. So you have the first heaven, which is the atmosphere. Then you have the second heaven, which is the universe and all the planets we know of. And the interesting one is the third one, the third heaven, which is God's dwelling place, which sounds like another dimension. So could they possibly be related with this dimension? Now, the story goes like this, as far as we know about the fallen angels. According to the book of Genesis, there was this first couple incident here on earth, Adam and Eve, that it was these fallen angels were involved with, according to the Bible, and for some reason they were not happy with this project. So therefore, a fallen angel called Satan, united against God with many other angels, and he wanted to change things. Now it's quite interesting, there is a number in the Bible about the amount of angels. It's called myriad of myriads, which is, if it is 10,000 by 10,000, which is 100 million. So according to the Bible, 1/3 of these angels, they revolted against God. And according to the book of Enoch, 200 of them, which were the archons, or the captains, as if you may say that, they descended upon the Mount Hermon, and they decided to change things here on earth. And of course, one of the things they did was to introduce people to secret technology and have affairs with the women of mankind as an attempt to corrupt the DNA. Now, these angels said to mingle and corrupt human DNA, and as far as we know, if you ever watched this film, the film Noah, they had as a result the creation of hybrids and the legendary Nephilim, or the giants of the pre-flood world. So this was an outright revolt of what is called in the Bible God, and his plan to create a planet only for humans in his image. So therefore, according to the Bible story, God took a decision to destroy the whole earth because every flesh was contaminated, and the whole DNA of mankind and animals and every living thing was contaminated from these fallen angels. Now, it's quite interesting if you watch that film. It's exactly the opposite of what the account of the Bible tells us about Noah and his story. And I find it interesting because the ones who create this film was, he's a believer, he's a firm believer in the occult, and he doesn't believe in the account. And why would they want to change the account in the Bible? That's very interesting. So what happened next is quite important when it comes to the fallen angel story. When a worldwide flood took place, these angels abandoned their human bodies and escaped the planet, hoping to reunite with God. But they didn't have any more this access to the third heaven. So therefore, there is this account in the Bible where it says in Jude 6, "And the angels who did not keep their positions of authority, but abandoned the proper dwelling place, he kept in darkness, bound with everlasting chains for judgment on the great day." So this is where the term fallen angels is coming from. These angels were not allowed to go back to where they were before, and so therefore they have restraint. Not only that, they have a time limit because there is some sort of destruction coming upon them. And this is quite interesting. Would they try to avoid judgment by trying to convince you that they are something else? They're not fallen angels, but they are aliens from another planet, in hoping that they will unite with mankind once more against God. And that would seem to be the case. Now, I know the mere mention of the word Bible is something which is old-fashioned, is lacking credibility. This is mainly what people believe generally today. And I'm not here to preach to you Christianity because I want you to compare sources. That's what I'm trying to do. There is this famous saying from Heraclitus, a 5th century philosopher. Because it is so unbelievable, the truth often escapes being known. And I put this photograph right next to it on purpose, because this is the collapse of the Twin Towers. You see, the source that you came to accept, which is the mass media, as the one you should believe in, it was wrong. And you know that because you saw the facts. So when you read the facts, you realize that the mass media are lying to your face. So what happened is completely different from the mainstream idea of what is true. So therefore, is it possible that we have been conditioned to believe that this whole story about aliens and UFOs is true, and completely discredit the only source which is telling you that these UFOs are not UFOs, these aliens are not aliens, they're fallen angels, and they want to bring the end of the world, and you will die along with them. So what do you do when you have two conflicting sources of information? From the one hand, you have the alien visitors, which they urge you to unite to a new world order and a government that as the only way to resolve our problems. And they describe it as a transition period that we have to all embrace, and we have to accept that we enter this new age. And on the other hand, you have this discredited book, the Bible, that warns against the New World Order, that tells you that it won't be a transition period. It tells you that you're going to die along with them. Well, when you are dealing with conflicting sources of information, what you have to consider is the credibility of the source. And for all the arguments I explained from the beginning, there is deception involved with the source that's giving you the UFO phenomenon, and therefore you should not believe it. And that brings me to the end of my presentation.